Welcome to Smart Talk, where we speak with the leading academics and other thoughtful persons on important challenges facing the world today. My name is Tom Rossman, and I'm a trustee at the Henry George School of Social Science. And today I have the immense pleasure of speaking with Steven Shafarman, who is an independent scholar and activist for universal basic income and land value return. He has been writing about both since the late 1990s, and he lives in DC. So, Steven, welcome to Smart Talks.
Thank you, Tom. Happy to be here.
Excellent. So I guess the first question I always liked, I'm a macro guy, right? So I'd love to hear about what your background is, how you came to these ideas. What was the inspiration that kind of gave you the impetus to look into UBI and land value return?
Well, I actually came to it by a very circuitous route, which puts me in a unique position relative to all of my basic income, guaranteed income associates. I was studying the way young children learn and move. And my primary profession is teaching a fitness healing modality called FlexAware. As young children learn to walk, they outgrow crawling and leave it behind. And one day while working on my PhD, I just stumbled across the old cliche, the body politic, and began to think about, well, if society is anything like a body, if our political system is anything like our body, then perhaps we can collectively outgrow pollution, racism, war, crime, and other matters. So I began to explore that and actually became somewhat obsessed by that. I had the good fortune at the time of knowing someone who was a very serious professional mentor, and he became my first reader and feedback system. And so I learned about Henry George in the early 1990s through a couple of very active Georgists. And so as I mentioned, I was in a PhD program in human development at the time, and one of my faculty scholars and with political backgrounds, and I was just being very speculative at first, and the idea of if society is like a body, well, then government ought to be like the nervous system, and government's role should be to ensure that every individual can manage his or her basic needs. And said, well, that means that we ought to have something like a guaranteed basic income, some way to ensure that every individual can manage the necessities. The next step, I began saying, well, what would be the simplest way to pay for that, to be most organic and integrated? And it seemed that we ought to tax what people take from nature. If you put up a fence and cut down trees, if you harvest minerals or salmon or whatever, and talking to my faculty advisors and my friend Bob, I began to learn the history and see, ideas about guaranteed income go back to Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson and others among the founders, and ideas about land value capture go back to land value return, go back to Thomas Paine, of course, and agrarian justice, and Henry George, and the more I found other thinkers who were on a similar track, the more I became convinced that these ideas make sense, that these ideas need to be in the public discourse. And one thing led to another. I self-published a book in '98 while I was still in graduate school, and have done several other books with small publishers. And here we are.
So you were on the cutting edge of the UBI movement, it sounds like.
Well, on the cutting edge, and I sort of reinvented it for myself. When I first started writing about this, I had not heard of the modern UBI movement.
Right.
The Basic Income Earth Network was actually founded in Belgium in 1986. And a few Americans began working on basic income in the 90s. And I only learned about them a few years after I became obsessed in my own way. And
Interesting. So, how does your UBI system work, and why do you feel that your UBI system is superior to other UBI systems that are out there?
I don't say it's necessarily superior, but and I'm agnostic about the details intentionally.
Mm,
Um, so some version of a basic income, I'm saying, is a necessity for a true democracy. That if we really want to have anything like a true democracy, we have to ensure that all citizens have means and incentives to participate as citizens.
mm,
And right now, of course, privileged elites have huge megaphones and social media presences, and the vast majority of people feel turned off and turned away. And
mm,
so, what I saw from the beginning is that a basic income would, in effect, provide everyone with a monthly reminder that we
mm,
are all citizens with a stake in creating a more just and sustainable world.
mm.
So,
So
uh,
the premise of your system is that in order to get people to do things, we have to pay them to do it.
yes and no. Um, One of the early proponents of guaranteed income, who I came across in that original research, was the psychologist Eric Fromm.
Mm,
And Fromm specifically wrote about the idea that we have to pay people to work and that we have to pay people to be citizens. And he said that's false. He said if you look at healthy people and if you look at young children, we naturally want to participate and be engaged with other people and with the world around us. And the notion that you have to pay people is really a sign of alienation.
mm,
So I fully endorse that. I think people naturally want to participate, people naturally want to explore. We are intrinsically impelled by curiosity.
mm,
Um, but in our market driven society, you need to ensure that everyone can manage at least the necessities. Uh,
mm,
One of the early proponents of an earlier version of this idea was President Franklin Roosevelt, who, in his Four Freedoms speech, said that necessitous men are not free men. When
mm,
people are afraid of for their basic necessities, they're not free to question government. They're not free to participate actively. They're
mm.
not free to demand social reforms and stronger democracy. And so the idea of a basic income is to just create a solid floor so that we
Mm.
can all be more free and active as citizens.
So what's the amount and what's the distribution mechanism that you're proposing?
Um, Again, I deliberately avoid debates about the amount.
Okay.
Um, it
But
might
it
be,
was, I guess the underlying question behind the question is, um, would the amount that you feel is necessary be required to allow someone to have a subsistence living based on that income alone?
well, the idea is that it's a solid, stable floor so that if you were unemployed, you could at least manage food and shelter. And maybe shelter would be a room in a shared house or some other uh, fairly basic accommodation. So the amount might be just $500 a month. But I
Mm,
do say that the amount could be subsidized or supplemented uh, at local or state levels. So it might be $500 a month as a national basic income, and New York City or Washington, D.C., or other places where the cost of living is higher than average might have a state or local uh, top up on that amount. So maybe
mm,
an extra $100 where the cost of living is high, or an extra $20 or $50 paid monthly.
mm,
The mechanism would be direct deposit into people's bank accounts. So one
right.
of the side effects of this would be that everyone would have a bank account.
Yeah.
And A major problem today is that among the very poor, a significant percentage are unbanked and not tied into the economic system.
Mhm.
So,
So where in the country? Because I'm trying to think. I grew up in North Central Ohio, where cost of living is pretty inexpensive compared to New York, where I live now. Where in the country can you have provide food and shelter for $500 a month?
well, for a couple, it's $1,000. And if it's not enough, again, the state or local government could add to that. And
Mm,
maybe the national basic income should be $1,000 a month.
mm,
My political strategy is to defer those specific questions in order to get some buy-in on the general concept.
mm. Okay. And
And
then so I'm trying to factor in the things that I know about UBI and what you're saying. Um, so what's the basic goal? Because you're not $500 a month is not going to allow people to not work, and it's going to be an amount that is a decent supplement, kind of like unemployment insurance, where it sort of is a stopgap measure, but doesn't really pay for your expenses. What's the actual goal of providing this extra money to people for free?
the actual goal is that everyone would know that they have at least this basic income. So and again, it's basic so that people by and large would still want to work. So some
Mm,
might choose to be full-time parents, or some might choose to live on a minimal amount while being students or poets or artists or
mm,
community organizers.
okay.
Um, so it's real freedom for all and let people make whatever choices they want. But again, it's basic so that most people will still want to work and earn and have a higher standard of living.
Mm, okay. So the criticism that I hear a lot of times from people who are opposing UBI is that once you get people addicted to this monthly income, money for free, right? All of a sudden the political influence that they have is greatly diminished because all the power is going to go to the people who are funding that. Because every benefit that you give to people turns into an expectation over time. So people like Milton Friedman and others have been in favor of UBI essentially to pay poor and working class people to essentially go away and be
Well,
satisfied with the minor amount that they have, and undermining their political power and undermining their ultimately their influence in the market because they're essentially placated.
well, that's one way of phrasing it. Um, I think Milton Friedman's real concern uh, was that we want to simplify government significantly. It wasn't simply that people would go away and be placated. And this is one of my strong arguments for UBI. So, one of the ways we would pay for it would be cutting all the other government programs as they become superfluous. So,
Mm,
if people have the basic income as a right, and it was Thomas Paine who said that it should be a right, not a charity. When people have that as a right, they will have incentives to be more active as citizens. We can
mm,
begin to cut existing welfare programs and uh, other subsidies to individuals and families. Again, being sure that people are not harmed, that they have the basic income first. And more powerfully, this eliminates a lot of the current efforts to promote economic growth and to create jobs. And most of the complications in our public policy and especially in the tax code are tax
mm.
credits for self-proclaimed job creators. And if we have a basic income as a right, then we could combine that with a simple flat income tax, which was like another idea from Milton Friedman,
Mm.
eliminating the tax breaks and subsidies that so complicate the tax code and that overwhelmingly flow to the wealthier elites.
Okay, so you're against progressive tax,
Well, if you
progressive
start
tax code?
if you start with a basic income,
Mm.
a flat tax actually the net effect is progressive. So if the flat tax is, let's say the basic income is $1,000 a month, so that's $12,000 a year. So for people with no other income, they're getting $12,000 a year. If the flat tax is 10% or 20%, people with $1 million income are paying the full 10% or 20% or 30% or whatever is the designated rate. And in between, there's a smooth line so that the net effect is progressive, but without the marginal disparities and disincentives. And so we're going to put a lot of tax attorneys and accountants out of business. Let
Uh-huh.
them be poets or parents or artists or Henry George activists.
So you make it progressive by giving people at the bottom more income.
Yeah,
And but the flat tax was always talked about as somewhere between, 10, 12, 15%. So you're talking about
and by
billionaires.
combining the two makes both of them possible and makes both of them more effective. And when I read Milton Friedman, uh, he presents them as separate matters to address different concerns. And
Mm.
I'm saying, look, just combine the two and both become feasible and both become politically practical.
So if we're going to we're going to give people and there's an income there's an income test for this for the UBI. Is it distributed
No,
to everyone?
yes.
Oh,
And
so
by
even
distributing it
even
to everyone,
billionaires.
yes, Elon Musk will get his $500 a month or
Oh,
$1,000 a month.
okay. Well, doesn't that then negate your progressive tax
No,
argument?
for Elon Musk, that's a penny or two.
Right, but if everybody's getting the same and he's still paying a very low flat tax rate, he's getting a
Well,
giant benefit. He's getting a net windfall for himself.
the flat tax might have to be 20% or 30%. And we're only talking about the income tax there. On where this gets much more powerful and interesting, and especially
Mm,
relevant for the Henry George School, is when we combine it with land value taxes.
yeah.
Elon Musk owns vastly more land and huge expanses of land in Texas, where he has his SpaceX business. Um, Billionaires have their private jets and are consuming fossil fuels for their jets, and um, they should all be paying a significant tax on what they take from nature. And
Mm.
the net effect is that the billionaires and millionaires will be paying probably much higher taxes than today, and will also have incentives to live more simply than today and to consume less of nature than today and to
Mm.
leave more of nature for our children and grandchildren and great grandchildren.
Right. So let's say that a bunch of people from the working class and the poor income stratas decide that they're just not going to work, and they're getting a $12,000 a year universal basic income. Of course, that's not enough to really pay for their living expenses. I mean, that's basically extreme, close to extreme poverty.
Yeah.
And how would that not, and one of the criticisms of UBI is how would that not explode the roles of Medicaid?
We have to reform the Medicaid and the healthcare system generally, of course. Um,
But
would it
let's just
explode the
say that's
roles?
not going to happen. Let's just say we have the healthcare system that we have today.
Um, I would suggest that those working people who choose not to work, or those working age people who choose not to have second jobs or third jobs, uh, would also have a guaranteed basic income and are likely to eat a better diet. And obesity and dietary diseases are highly correlated with poverty. Some of those people might choose to live in shared housing situations so that they can maximize their quality of life while minimizing consumption and expenditures.
Well, if you're making $12,000 a year, you're not living in a single family home.
Right. But for a couple, that's $24,000 a year. And again, my point is that I want to maximize individual freedom and choices.
Mm,
So, as I look at this idea of basic income, especially combined with land value taxes or land value return, it's maximizing individual freedom, maximizing the incentives of everyone to demand something like a true democracy, maximizing our sense of responsibility for a sustainable world that can serve the needs of future generations.
right. That's interesting. So I was just trying to do a little math here. How much is that? 12,000 times 330 million.
And so I use the term citizen dividends interchangeably with basic income. And so it's,
Okay, so that's okay. So let's just work on that basis. That's almost $4 trillion.
yeah,
Okay, where you could land, how much you're going to generate from your land and mineral taxes?
um, if we want a larger basic income, we'll need to have higher taxes. If we accept a smaller basic income, we can keep taxes low. And
Well, we can't raise taxes that much because we have a flat rate.
well, the
So
flat rate could be
if you're going to raise
30%.
taxes, if you're going to raise taxes on the working class and the middle class, that's going to really squeeze their income.
Well, the flat rate might be 20% or 30%, and the flat rate might have a surtax. The poorer people might want a surtax on very large incomes.
Hmm.
Um, Again, the power of this system is it eliminates all the arguments for tax cuts to favor job creators and to favor economic growth in the abstract. For example, Ronald Reagan supported the idea of tax simplification and eliminated the lower rate for capital gains taxes. That was added back in a few years later. But there's no argument for lower rate for capital gains taxes or for uh, such that subsidize Wall Street billionaires and millionaires. Everyone should pay the flat rate on every dollar that they earn.
Hmm. So income taxes would be equalized with capital gains taxes.
I think, yes, income is income.
Okay. Well,
And
it's
again,
not income.
Ronald Reagan
Capital
and
gains is not income.
conservatives have supported that.
All right, but capital gains and income are two different things.
Well, what's the argument for a lower rate on capital gains taxes?
I mean, I'm not advocating this, but the argument is that you want to incentivize. Well, if you live in
You
a
want to
if
incentivize investors. In other
if
words,
you
the capitalists.
well, there's a lot of people are investors. My dad was a factory worker and a farmer, and he has a 401k,
Yeah,
so he's an investor.
yes,
And millions
absolutely.
and hundreds
And
of millions of middle class and working class Americans are have investments just because they're saving for retirement.
yes, well, and I think that's another issue that we need to consider is the distinction between saving, investing, and speculating.
Mm. Okay.
And yes, people are saving for retirement, and they do that through 401ks and IRAs and such.
Yeah.
Uh, and there's nothing wrong with that. But again, there are huge inequities in all of those mechanisms.
Right. So your proposal really isn't as much a proposal for UBI, as it is a proposal for sort of a complete rewriting of the social contract.
Um, I would say that yes.
Okay.
I'm saying that we should have a real social contract that empowers everyone as citizens.
Mm,
And this is, in fact, uh, much closer to what America's founders envisioned in the Declaration and the Constitution than the system we have today.
you mean the social contract?
Yes.
So maybe I missed this, but I've read most of the Federalist Papers and the Constitution and the Declaration. I don't remember anything mentioning UBI in
No, there's no
those
mention of
documents.
UBI. There's also no mention of jobs and no mention of the economy. Those words
Mm,
do not appear. But the founding idea from the Declaration is that all people are created equal with unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
mm.
Well, in a market based society, life and liberty require at least some basic income. It's hard to pursue happiness when you have no money.
So that's interesting. So you keep using the phrase market based society. Is that the phrase that you use?
Yeah, I think I used that phrase, but
Yeah.
yeah,
So it's interesting because Michael Sandel, the Harvard professor, has written and talked a lot about democracy and the crisis of democracy and some of the very similar themes that you're talking about. And he thinks that one of the biggest problems that we have is that we went from having a market economy to a market society.
hmm,
And several times you've mentioned this notion that, you've got to pay people to do things and everything's based on money. But, there seems to be this moral and cultural and spiritual deficit, which is one of the reasons that I personally was attracted to Henry George, because Henry George talked, progress and poverty. Why, with all the progress, why is there so much poverty? I don't know if you know the story, but one of the things
yes,
that really inspired him was when he went from the Upper East Side in New York to the Lower East Side in New York, and he saw the opulent mansions and the servants and the food, and went to the Lower East Side and found these conditions that were just, there are farm animals that live better than workers in the Lower East Side in the late 19th century and early 20th century. I mean, the muckrakers, the
yeah,
jungle, and
absolutely.
children working knee deep in blood and guts, and in slaughterhouses in Chicago. And I mean, I could go on, but the point is that, um, do you believe that we're a market society, and that the things that we are focused on are should surround money and issues of money, and there's very little other, motivating factors that should really be
No,
behind people's actions?
the way you stated, I absolutely do not believe that. I
Okay.
believe that what we need is a basic income so that we can move beyond being so concerned with money and markets, and again, to maximize individual freedom.
Hmm. Okay. Interesting. So, who are your? Yeah, I know you mentioned Thomas Paine. Is there any other major influences that you sort of draw from? Because I know, when you look at the land value return, which is the phrase that I like to use for the concept of, taxing nature and natural goods. Um, who are your other influencers that really kind of inspired you? I mean, if you look at land value return, it goes all the way back to Moses. There's
Yeah.
Abraham Lincoln. There's a lot of people who talked about, how the products of nature, belong to everyone.
Yes, and I absolutely endorse that. But what we've seen over time, and Lincoln and the Homestead Act is a great example, we've seen over time that the ruthless have somehow captured that land and have driven people off of the land that they acquired through homesteads.
Mm,
And all of these ideas become corrupted. And that's why I'm saying that basic income as a right to every citizen.
mm,
And it does lead to a rethinking of the whole social contract.
Hmm. So you think instead of going top down social contract UBI, you're going UBI social contract.
Yes, and bottom up, and empower individuals to be active citizens.
Mm,
Uh, when people read the Declaration of Independence,
right.
everyone knows the first three self-evident truths:
Mm,
life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness created equal, unalienable rights. But
mm,
immediately after, Jefferson has two more statements that begin with the word that. It
mm,
says that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men deriving their powers from the consent of the governed, and that whenever any government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute a new government that will affect their safety and happiness.
mm.
Government is necessary. Every human society throughout history has had some organizing principle, something, some type of government, whether it was an absolute dictator or a king or a true democracy or
Mm,
something closer to anarchy. But there has to be some organizing principle for people to live in community.
yeah.
And basic income is a way to ensure that people recognize that government is necessary. I think
Yeah.
a lot of the pathologies in our modern society are from an anti government populism, where people say that government is only an oppressor and not a force for liberating us, a force for
Hmm.
helping us to resolve our differences and function effectively together.
Hmm.
Government is necessary, but consent is also necessary.
Yeah.
And what we have today in our political dysfunction is a deficit of respect for both of those principles.
Hmm. Yeah, no, the survival of the fittest is one of my little things. So, uh, you know, Darwin didn't write that. That was
Yes,
another 19th century philosopher. But he actually made several statements that it was survival of the most adaptable or survival of the most
exactly
cooperative.
right.
And
Exactly
so,
right. And that's one of my great sources for all of these ideas. I, he was using the word
Darwin.
fit. Yeah, he was using
Okay.
the word fit
Yeah.
as fitting into the environment and fitting into the current situation,
Yeah.
and not fit as strength.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
survival of the fittest is a very corrupt idea. And as you say, was not from Darwin, was from his followers and glorified by Andrew Carnegie and the other so-called robber barons.
Yeah. Well, it really played into the whole capitalist ideology of the 19th century, which I think was a gigantic perversion of Adam Smith. But, you know,
Yes, it was absolutely, and that's an
yeah,
important point. Is
yeah,
Adam Smith was talking about a market that was much more like a farmer's market or a flea market. It was a neighborhood market where individuals participated voluntarily and ongoingly.
yeah.
And the markets today are dominated by international investors and corporations that are, for the most part, solely answerable to their shareholders.
Hmm. So let me throw another little curveball into the mix. So, are you familiar with the Bolsa Familia in Brazil?
Yes, absolutely.
So one of the I mean I've heard some criticism of it, but by and large I think recognized as one of the most successful um, um, poverty reduction programs of the last, what do you say, 20 or 30 years maybe?
Well, and I'll give you some history. The
Okay, but let me
Bolsa
let
from
me let me ask the question first, and then you can do the history and respond. So the Bolsa Familia, one of the primary characteristics of it is not just requirements, heavy requirements for the qualification of the aid, but it also um, requires ongoing verification that you're still qualified to receive the aid. So my question to you is, I'll just make it very simple. Given that that's the example of the most successful poverty reduction program in recent times, um, And the characteristics are completely opposite of UBI. We're not giving people money for nothing. We're actually saying if you need money, we're going to provide it to you, but you have obligations. You have obligate, mothers are obligated to bring their babies in for checkups,
Right,
and they're obligated to do the things that they need to do to prepare
right.
for work once you know once their caregiving days are over. So anyway, what is your thought on that?
Well, my first thought is that if we move to a true basic income, it eliminates the need for all that bureaucracy and all those incentives or disincentives. But to get back to a little bit of history, uh, one of the leading thinkers behind the Bolsa Familia was a Brazilian economist named Eduardo Suplicy. And
Mm-hmm.
Eduardo did his PhD at either Michigan or Michigan State, and then did postdoctoral work at Stanford.
Mm-hmm.
He came from a wealthy Brazilian family
Right.
and was doing his PhD work in the US in the late 1960s and early 70s when guaranteed income was a mainstream idea. When Milton Friedman was talking about the negative income tax, and John Kenneth Galbraith and Martin Luther King were talking about guaranteed income.
Mm-hmm.
And he moved back to Brazil to teach at the University of Sao Paulo. And uh, in all of his classes, he would talk about this idea of a guaranteed income. He then became a close ally in the founding of the Workers' Party with past and again current President Lula da Silva.
Right.
And so the Bolsa Familia, as you've described it accurately, is a sort of compromise. Yes, it's bureaucratized and has requirements. Eduardo is still one of the world's leading champions of expanding it into a true basic income.
Right, but you really didn't answer my question. So my question was, given that that is the most successful program, we both agree that's the most successful poverty reduction program, and it's not including giving millionaires and billionaires and upper income people, $12,000 a year. Um, how, how do you address the fact that that was the most successful program and it didn't include the characteristics that you're talking about? Because no, let's be honest, no one has ever done an experiment on UBI, right? And you can't
Um,
really do a social experiment on UBI because if you give people money and then you say, do you like the fact that I gave you money? Of course they're going to say yes. So in terms of a real experiment where you have apples to apples, double blind situations where either a society or a community does better or does worse based on that. That kind of experiment, it's most of social science. It's very difficult to do those kinds of experiments.
yes,
The
and
natural.
there have been many experiments with smaller versions of guaranteed cash payments for a year or two, more than 140 experiments in recent years around the United States.
Yeah, but
Some
what
of
do you, I
them.
mean, what's the question? The question is, do you like getting free money?
So
Who's going to say no to that?
there have also been two pilot projects that come closer to a true UBI.
Mm,
One was in Namibia, where it was planned that they wouldn't tell people. They went into a small town uh, and on Christmas Day called a town meeting and announced that for the next year, everyone's going to get this basic amount of money.
right.
And for the first year, the results were very good.
Well, of
There was
course,
also a
because you're
pilot
giving
project.
people free money. Who's going to say no to
Yeah,
that? Especially in a country like Namibia. What's that average annual income in Namibia?
absolutely.
So I mean,
But
whatever you give them is going to be a
yeah,
substantial portion. So
well,
let's
I
let's
would
get
like
back
to
to the
see.
so we still you still haven't answered the question about how, since Bolsa Familia was the most successful poverty reduction program of recent decades, why we shouldn't do something like that in the United States, where we actually have a rigorous schedule and can give money to the people that need it, and they have a requirement to verify that they need it, so that we're not giving $12,000 away a year to billionaires and millionaires and and everybody
Well,
else who doesn't need it.
first, we're going to simplify the tax code and tax it back from the billionaires and millionaires with a flat tax and eliminate the tax breaks that they currently enjoy. Second, the idea of making it universal is that, and people talk about Social Security as the third rail of politics. Well, a basic income would be the third rail uh, by an order of magnitude more powerful.
But that's an apples to
And
oranges. That's an apples to oranges comparison. Social Security you pay into, and then you get your payments back after you retire. So there's
yes,
no.
and I'm saying again that basic income would be an order of magnitude more powerful and would be something that the conservative politicians would never try to take away. They might refuse to expand it further, while the liberal politicians might want to expand it further.
Well,
The
I'm still
starting point,
confused. I'm still confused why you think, Andrew Yang and all these techno, humanists are all in favor of UBI because it's an opiate, it's the new opiate of the masses, right? If you can pay poor people and working class people and middle class, lower middle class people to just go away and not be a problem and not really try to challenge their power, then of course they're going to do that. Why would they
well,
oppose that? It's a
and
very small amount of their fortunes, their vast fortunes, to be able to just basically buy these people's acquiescence to their control of the country.
well, I submit that that would be wonderful if they could implement it on that basis. And but I submit also, and have said already, that I'm confident that people will not simply go away. That people with a basic income will demand something more like a true democracy and will agitate for greater rights and
Mm.
will agitate for more sustainable policies that serve their children and grandchildren.
So you don't believe that once they get addicted to that, once they get addicted to that income, that they're not going to acquiesce to whatever the powerful want, so that they can continue to get that income.
Um, if we have anything like a democracy, I'm confident that most people will not. That people will
Well, I
want to
don't
be
know.
have a voice in our government and will want to elect people who will address other issues, and that democracy will be strengthened, especially at local levels where people can
Mm,
have a more effective input. And that's one reason I like the idea of the basic income being uh, at local, state, and national levels.
mm. So Stephen, does it not concern you that for your plan to work, we're going to have to rewrite the social contract, implement the new social contract, and then apply the new social contract. We're going to have to strengthen democracy at a time when democracy's been in retreat for a couple of decades now. We're going to have to do quite a few things that are contingent on your plan being successful. Does that not concern you that it might be, to use a word, utopian?
I'm happy to have you use the word utopian, but I'm saying that the starting point is a basic income, and that the rewriting of the social contract and all other reforms will naturally follow over time.
Okay. So if you get the UBI, these other things will fall into place.
Over time and perhaps haphazardly, but yes, people
Mm,
will want to be active citizens. People will want to address issues of democracy and social justice and peace.
mm, yeah. But people don't, I mean, the funny thing about elections, I don't know if you've ever read the book, The Myth of the Rational Voter, and the last couple of elections have kind of, illustrated this, that tens of millions of people are voting for people who do not represent their interests.
Yes,
And so there's a big disconnection. I mean, it's difficult even to get, factual arguments in our current political process. So
yeah,
given that kind of polar, and by the way, for 2024, the Merriam-Webster dictionary word of the year was polarization. So, given the fractious political environment, how do you see all these things coming together in that in a environment in which we can't even have an intelligent conversation about anything?
I agree with you absolutely that the situation is fraught and uh, misinformation and disinformation are rampant, and with social media almost unstoppable. So, what I'm working on now is a new book about basic income
Mhm.
to come out in the spring of 2026.
Okay. What's the thesis?
The thesis is that if you truly agree that all people are created equal with unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness,
Right.
then the only way to achieve that is with something like a basic income. And
Mm,
then we can then talk about the details. And
mm.
then in the section on strategies and tactics, I will be arguing that every political group today uh, could endorse some version of this plan. So for the Trump MAGA crowd, they might frame this as make America greater than ever. For the liberal Democrats, they might frame this in terms of social justice that includes all races, genders, and identity groups.
Mm.
So the Democrats might have their version. The traditional Republicans might have their version, which emphasizes cutting government and paying down the deficit. The MAGA Republicans might have their
Well,
version.
hold on a second. You're saddling the government with $4 trillion of new spending per year. So
Yeah.
how are you paying down the deficit? And you're also going to you're going to quadruple or quintuple the number of people on Medicaid. So how is that going to cut government
Okay,
spending?
let's ignore that I mentioned the deficit. That
Oh,
over
okay.
time.
Let's
So,
ignore that.
but on the deficit, and I think our foreign policy should be to help other countries enact some version of basic income. And our foreign policy should be to promote peace actively around the world so that we can begin to cut excess military spending.
Mm,
So, again, my point is that MAGA Republicans might have their version, make America greater than ever. Traditional Republicans might have their version saying, we'll support a very small basic income, and we'll absolutely resist any effort to increase it until we pay down the deficit, at least partially.
right.
Progressive Democrats might have their version. The Green Party, the Libertarian Party, the Forward Party, other groups might have their version. And let's all work towards some consensus and compromise while and denouncing anyone who refuses to compromise as an active or inadvertent agent of the dysfunctional status quo.
Mm,
Because the one thing
okay.
everyone agrees on today is that the political status quo is profoundly dysfunctional,
Yes.
polarized.
Yes. Agreed. So if everything, so the one question that I'm left with after hearing, your explanation on this is that if this whole so very complicated chain of events that has to take place in order for this to become your vision to become reality. It all starts with the implementation of UBI. So isn't it sort of incumbent on you to actually develop a program of UBI so that we actually have something to specifically talk about? Because just talking about it in vague generalities is, maybe compelling to certain people, certain political groups within the country, but it's really not interesting for a lot of people. And so I don't think on a philosophical basis the environment is conducive toward, you know, converting a lot of people over to being, UBI enthusiasts. So given that, and given the fact that in order for this whole chain of events to take place, UBI has to get passed. I mean, isn't your sort of first step going to be putting a workable UBI plan on paper and then and then starting to implement that, or trying to get people on board with that specific
Yes,
program?
that's exactly what I'm aspiring to do with the new book, is to
Okay.
present a simple plan and then strategies and tactics to implement it.
Mm.
And again, saying that
But a
if you,
specific plan on UBI.
yes, a specific,
Okay.
and saying that the basic amount, whatever the amount is,
Mm.
$500 a month, $1,000 a month, there will be some people who say that's too low. There will be others who say that's too high, and we'll have to compromise.
Mm.
And with regard to cutting existing government programs, uh, the basic income first, so that people are not harmed when existing welfare and programs are cut.
Yeah.
And again, to look toward making government simpler and more effective and more efficient and more accountable by empowering everyone to be active citizens, and
Mm.
especially restoring the Ninth and Tenth Amendments and saying, let's recognize that democracy has to begin at the local level.
Mm.
And in recent decades, there's been far too much talk about the president and the US Congress, and not nearly enough about local democracy and what it means to be a citizen.
Mm. Okay. So we need to wrap up here, Stephen, but it's been a great talk, and I really appreciate your time and your illuminating insights. Um, Give us a last little phrase, last little couple of sentences where you inspire us to set our hair on fire and run after the UBI train.
um, well, the working title for the 2026 book is Individuals First.
Okay.
And I'm suggesting that our political system, for the last few decades at least, has had things inverted, and that all the emphasis has been on the president and the Congress, and individuals are subsumed under abstract programs or phrases about the market or the economy or jobs. Again, the words jobs and economy and economic growth are nowhere in the founding documents or the Federalist Papers.
Mm.
So I'm saying that a true democracy puts individuals first, individuals as citizens, and then we can begin to work out all of our problems
Mm.
and create
Okay.
something more like a just, sustainable society that we can all be proud of. And that if this idea starts in the United States, other countries will rapidly copy it. And if the
Mm.
United States doesn't move ahead with some version of this, other countries will lead. And it might start with some small Pacific Island nation, or uh, some nation that's going in turmoil. And Gaza is so much in the news these days. And I think the best approach for rebuilding Gaza, or any country that, or Haiti, or any country that's in turmoil, would be to have some outside force go in
Mm.
and distribute money directly to ordinary citizens so that they can make the decisions about how to rebuild and restructure their society, not
Mm.
have Western consultants going in and telling them what's best, and
Mm.
not Western experts to go in and design governments and programs. And we saw the failure of the westernized model in Iraq and Afghanistan and many other places.
Yeah,
Democracy
definitely.
has to start with individuals first. A healthy society has to put individuals first. The analogy of the body politic, individuals are like cells. And a functioning government and a healthy society should ensure that every individual has the nutrients it needs to be healthy,
Mm.
and that there's a coordination among individuals and groups, like the coordination that happens with the healthy nervous system,
Mm.
so that we can all move toward a more desired society and achieve the future we want.
Excellent. All right. Well, Stephen, thanks again for your time. I really appreciate it. Encourage everyone to where do you find your books on Amazon or?
There are on Amazon, and I'm not actively promoting the prior books at this time because I'm not happy with the way I presented the ideas there. But
Okay.
yeah, so the last book is Our Future, the
Mhm.
Basic Income Plan.
Okay.
And
Sounds
uh,
great. Well, thanks
this has
again,
been fun,
Stephen.
Tom. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And that's it for this edition. For more information, please visit us at hgsss.org. I am Tom Rossman, and thank you so much for watching Smart.